My name is Claire van Kampen. I'm a playwright, director and composer, a fairly recent playwright, and I was the founding musical director at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in 1997.
So what took you from composer to playwright?
Well, in a sense, it's all one, being in the theatre. So when I took the decision to move into the theatre as a musician, I thought, well, theatre's a very holistic thing. It's not just that I'm not an actor. So you have a choice. You can be a composer, you can be a director, you can write the plays. It's all story. So in a sense, I was a composer for, 40 years? So I thought it's time I do something else as well. And I've always wanted to write, ever since I was very little. And I had to make a choice to become a professional musician quite early. Became a concert pianist, actually, at the Royal College of Music. Then a composer. So gradually I've been moving towards the theatre, sort of in the latter part of my life.
How has your musical background affected your writing style?
Well, I suppose an ear for dialogue. I listen a lot. Perhaps I listen more than I look, or I certainly listen more than many directors do. Directors are by and large visual people, which is very generalised. But on the whole, they're looking at stage pictures. They're looking at where actors are standing in the stage picture. They're not often listening to the tempo of dialogue and the way we speak to each other in a naturalistic sense. And you get wonderful writers like Pinter, of course, and Shakespeare, who knew exactly how to get dialogue down on a page. So that's what intrigued me. That's sort of where I began, in a sense. How do I get real people onto the page?
How is that process of getting real people onto the stage? How do you find it? Some writers find it torture. Well, I'm not sure.
Well, it's a very interesting question, because at first it feels very natural. You imagine a conversation, often in the street or in cafes or whatever, you come across conversations, don't you? You're not there at the beginning of them. You come in sort of halfway through. And I've done so many Shakespeare plays. I've done almost all of them. And very rarely does a scene start at the top of somebody beginning to say something. Often people come on stage and they're already in conversation, because that's what we do. And that's how we hear life. We hear life through fragments and snatches of conversation. So it seemed to me a very good way to begin. And so you imagine people together and what they're talking about, their need to speak. I mean, why do I need to tell you this now? I have a need to share this with you. So that's what you want to find as a playwright or as a writer. What's the need for that person to say what they're saying? And then what's the other person's reaction to that need? Are they going to be challenged by it? Are they going to add to it? Are they going to disagree or agree? So you start with all of that. Now, later on down the line comes all the difficulties, because then you want to be sure that you have a story that has action and that it really is compelling. And moving the story forward is the mark of a great writer. And I don't profess to be a great writer yet.
What's your process of editing then?
I'm not bad at editing. Because as a composer, particularly for the theatre, you can't be proud about it. You can't be egocentric. A director says, you're going to have to cut 2 minutes because the show's too long and this cue, we don't need so much. Now, 2 minutes of music is a lot. It can take, 3 days, 4 days to write 2 minutes of music. So you have to kind of swallow your pride and go, okay, for the good of the show, I'll do it. And so you get into that frame of mind. So when you look at editing, you've got to not be precious. You've got to say, what serves the story? What's the audience understanding? How am I going to give them this story in the most economical and powerful way? And often you have to just jettison all your best bits, you think. Throw them overboard. And actually, it's usually the better for it.
Okay, once you've gone through that process, so you've been through that process, you've written something, it's there. What unique qualities does live performance bring?
Well, actually, it's not even in performance, it's in rehearsal, because a play is just that, it's playful. It's not a piece of literature. And so often I read scripts that come through the door, or you read plays, and they're so literary. And plays were never supposed to be that. They're supposed to be real, how people really behave. So you may write it, but then you get it into rehearsal and you hear it coming out of the actors' mouths, and it's that awful kind of cringe moment where you think, this is not how that person should speak. I mean, it's way too many words. And if it's a good actor, and they usually are, they'll have great suggestions. How about if I just switch the sentence round and I start with what you've written at the end of it? For example, do you think we should go on holiday next week? Is perhaps more natural to go, I've been thinking next week. Do you think we should go on holiday? But as a writer, you might not write it like that. You see what I mean? So it's another step in the process. It's very, very exciting for a writer to meet the actor in rehearsal. And then the next step is in front of an audience who have not had 3 to 6 weeks rehearsal with you. They don't know the story. They're not invested. They've paid their money, but they want to give you, they want the story from you. So I tend to watch them quite carefully. And in previews, we've got usually a luxury whereby we can cut and change and develop and do a few rewrites. And it's always the audience I watch in previews.
What do you learn from them?
I learn where their attention is and their focus. If they start sort of looking down at their watch, that's a kind of bad moment. I want them to be leaning forward in their chairs. I want them to be interested. Sometimes you can see where they're confused, where they're watching something and they're interested, and suddenly you can see that they're thinking. You don't want an audience to do that. You want them to be, ahead of them, not behind them. You want to be leading an audience forward, so they're excited to know what's going to happen next.
Okay. What are the capabilities of music in theatre?
I've changed my mind about that so many times over the course of my career. Starting out, I used to think that it was so important and that I laced everything with music cues, and I kind of could almost tell the story with music. You could have taken the words away, and that in my mind. It varies. I think let's look at Shakespeare. I think you shouldn't underscore Shakespeare at all, and yet I did for years and years, and probably until about 5 years ago. I was doing beautiful cues that told you how to feel and think. Now I think the words are such powerful pieces of music in themselves. You don't want to get in the way. Shakespeare knows when to have music and when not. And so gradually you begin to have a sense of where music is helpful and where it's not. Other pieces that are not so text-based become very powerful with great choices of music, whether it's extant music that you love to use, like a piece of Philip Glass or something, or whether you get a composer to write something very specific for you. So it depends. But I think, for my sense, less is always more.
That's quite a big shift to have gone from underscoring Shakespeare for the Globe to thinking it shouldn't be there at all. How else are there any other big ways in which your perception of theatre has changed over the course of your career?
Yeah, I think it's changed and it's changing, because I just had a really fascinating discussion actually with 20 people around a table here about where they feel that theatre's letting them down, or they're not engaged with theatre as it is now. And it's funny because it's sort of coming round full circle to something I believed in quite a long time ago, that theatre is trapped in buildings. In a sense, theatre was never meant to be in buildings at all. It was in the street. And in many countries in the world, it still is. In carnival or in street theatre form, it doesn't live in houses where you go in and sit in the dark and you watch basically a picture on a screen with 3D people, actors. I think it has a place indoors, of course it does, that wonderful feeling of an event that's all happening under a roof together. But that's rare. Often you go and it's a dry experience. You think, I paid an awful lot of money, and actually I would have been just as happy watching tennis at home on television, or sport, or Netflix or something. And you feel empty. And I think it's to do with the fact that theatre's been taken out of community, whereas it used to be come out of community in the real sense that it was an expression of what that community was. And I think we have to get back there. I don't know how we do it. It needs money, funding. It needs attitude changing. But I think that's where I've seen the most exciting theatre in my life, is in places that you wouldn't expect.
What's been some of the most exciting theatre you've seen?
I thought you were going to ask that. Actually, Punch Drunk. I don't know if you heard of that company. Punch Drunk, many years ago, took over an old building in the East End. I think it was a warehouse. And they did a performance of Faust, the Faust story. But every floor of the warehouse was dressed differently. And you went in, and it was a sort of, you took your own journey as a member of the audience. So you were given a mask, so that told people that you were a member of the audience. But you were free to roam wherever you wanted to go in the warehouse. Now, it was clever because there were certain structures in place that controlled the audience in here and there. But basically, you followed your instinct. I like that actor. Where is he going? I'm going to follow him. You'd come across a scene that was being played. It was very, very clever. And it's another Punch Drunk show is still going on in New York. I think it's been going on now for 6 years or so, called Sleep No More, which is the story of Macbeth in an old hotel that was sort of about to be condemned or changed, and they're still there. So that tells me that people want it. People want an experience. They don't just want to look at something. They want to be part of it and feel it sensually and be free to choose options, choices. It's an interactive experience.
But there's a big growth in experience culture at the moment, from websites like Airbnb to events like Secret Cinema. Do you think theatre risks being left behind?
I think it does. I think at the moment there's a fork in the road. It can either get so commercialised that we're paying huge sums of money to see stars on stage, or popular books that have been made into plays like Harry Potter, which is a very good experience. And then the rest of it is sort of lots of different options that are mainly fringe-oriented, where, for example, the vaults in Waterloo, very exciting. You can go there, it's very varied. You may get a fantastic show followed by a show that you don't quite understand, maybe not so good. But that's a happening thing. It's pretty packed. You can eat, you can drink. I think what's dangerous is the commercial road is going to be so exclusive. There are less and less people that are going to be able to go to West End theatres. Even with somebody like Sonia Friedman, who gives, 25 or 100 tickets at an incredibly cheap price if you turn up on the day. Even with somebody like that, it's going to become so exclusive that it's really not fired by normal people in the community. It's only a very small part of society that can take part in that kind of theatre. So I don't know where we're going with it. I'd love to see a middle ground where there was funding, as a long time ago in my life there was. You could take a risk and you wouldn't lose your shirt. You would have the right to what you would call fail, although I don't think there's any sense of failure in experimentation. But you could try different things. And I think that's how we grow and how we learn about art and culture. If you don't have access to any kind of funding and you can only do Romeo and Juliet because you need the footfall to pay for it. Where are we going? And what are we doing? Why are we doing theatre at all? So it's my personal belief, shared by not only a few, that the government should stop spending billions on defence and actually spend a little bit of money on art and culture. I think that would be really great.
I agree. Sorry, your attitude towards failure sounds interesting. Can you talk a bit more about that, maybe?
I think that our education system programs us to fail, to feel that we fail from an early age. I think it's very poor. We're asked to take part in exams that have a structure very early on as children. We're asked to stop playing and to start learning, which means we have to work for something that will get marked, ticked. We have scores. And this sets up a feeling that we've got to do it right. You can't fail. You mustn't get a bad score, or I think the programming of children and teenagers in our kind of education system is incredibly flawed. And this leads to the fact that you can't just take a risk in your workplace, whatever it is. You can't try something because you haven't actually got the mindset that is expansive enough to embrace experimentation and something that may not work. But you've tried it. You're not going to try that. Whenever I go and work in America, weirdly, that doesn't have a fantastic education system, but it has a much more of a can-do culture that's built into it. If I offer up an idea, the response is always, oh, that's interesting. How are you going to do that? How do you want to make that work? Here, it's not that. It's, I don't know. Don't know if we've got the money to do that. Oh, do you think that's going to work? It's the way we're programmed early on. And I think it's almost like a built-in expectation of failure that stops us growing and taking a risk and daring to fail. What
theatre would you recommend? What plays would you suggest people go see or try read, if you would recommend that, for someone who wants to get into it but hasn't had the opportunity to yet?
It's a very, very good question, because so much of theatre is reflective of, depending where it is, we're talking often about London, but we've become very London-centric in our arts. I don't know if someone on Tyneside would have the same views as me down in London. They may or they may not. I don't know how much theatre or access to theatre they would get going up to Tyneside now. Where's the funding? So let's look at London. Obviously the Globe, you can pay £5. You can walk in with a beer. No one's going to tell you not to. You can leave if you're bored. You can stay for 10 minutes. You can stay for an hour. You can stay for 3 hours. It's very easy. Yeah, you have to stand. But actually, if you're interested in what you're looking at and hearing, that feels like nothing. And you've got the advantage of maybe actors coming through the yard and you feeling that you're part of something. I think the Globe's doing a great thing at the moment by, it sounds such a cliche, but embracing diversity in all areas, looking at actors that have not been given opportunities because they're not what we would call able-bodied, that they are physically challenged or that they are deaf or, they can't see very well. These actors haven't had opportunities, and the Globe is giving them not only opportunities, but actually welcoming all kinds of people into companies that were never given opportunities before. And people in the audience see that and feel that that's reflective of who we are. So I'm hoping that will grow and that people will see the Globe as their theatre as they once did.
What do you have in store next?
Well, at the Globe?
You personally?
Me personally? Yeah. Well, my links with the Globe will never be broken because I was there at the beginning. So it's almost like a child that you've seen grow. But personally, I'm moving into directing a film.
Really? Can you talk about it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I've written the screenplay, and I'm directing a film about the artist Elaine de Kooning, who is married to Willem de Kooning, and it's about, you know, women that weren't seen, and her history is kind of forgotten. I mean, there was a great Lee Krasner exhibition recently at the Barbican, which, you know, you've only got to see one of her paintings to know how brilliant she was, but she was married to Jackson Pollock. You know, that was a great degree of difficulty. And the same with Elaine de Kooning. She was in the shadow of a very tall tree. So these women have kind of got lost in the kind of sea of the abstract expressionists and history. So I'm very thrilled that someone asked me to do this, and it's extremely scary and thrilling at the same time to be directing a film.
Yeah. Are you entering production soon? Is it?
We'll be doing pre-production very soon, and we're shooting it next year. Yeah.
Lastly, have you found the process? It's probably a big question to say lastly, but the process of taking a screenplay and turning it, or being about to turn it into a film, versus taking a script and turning it into live performance theatre.
Well, it's the second script I've turned into. Well, I turned my play into a screenplay. You know, so yeah, I'm very new at it. I have no idea how it will be. I hope it'll be something people want to see. But you know, there again, I'm taking a risk. But I feel I'm too old not to.
Brilliant. Claire, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.